Hello and welcome to SBK Unplugged, Sheldon Bosley Knight's Land and Property podcast. My name is Kate Gould and I'm the host of the show. Today I am in the studio with our Associate Director Nick Kyriacou, our Lettings Director Rebecca Dean, and a special guest David French from Tara & Co, specialist in student landlords. Before we start, I would like to say a big thank you to Mill Street for having us in their studio. Thank you very much for having us again. So today we're going to be talking all things Renters' Rights Bill and its impact on landlords and by association their tenants, and what it's going to mean for our lettings business as well. It's currently going through Parliament, had its second reading in the House of Lords, and it's going to have quite huge ramifications for the whole of the private rental sector and of course for student landlords as well, who are part of that. Looks likely to become law by the summer. I'd like to touch on a few key things like the abolition of Section 21 no-fault evictions, end of fixed-term tenancies, and the issue of no rent in advance, and just to explore what that's going to mean and how we're all feeling about it. So,
I mean, just to point out on that timescale when you mentioned it should be coming in summertime, and I think they're even planning earlier, aren't they? They've mentioned some months of April, May time. I personally that's way too quick.
Yeah, I mean the latest information I've had on that is that it's going to be more towards September time, because there's got to be a period to allow agents to adjust and make plans to be able to support landlords. Obviously, changes to documentation. There will be lots of things that will be needed to gear us up ready for this, and we are being promised a 2 to 3 month period to be able to prepare the business. So predictions from my recent meetings have been more around the 1st of September,
right.
But obviously that's yet to be confirmed.
Yeah, I think that's in line with what I've also read. I think ultimately they're going to pass it through law around that time, around that March, April, with then a few months lead time into actual implementation.
That's 6 months from now, isn't it? That's still too quick.
It's quick, yeah. I mean, there will be a lot of changes to make before then. But of course, key thing here is educating landlords and making sure landlords are aware of what is to come and how the changes are going to impact on them, their portfolio, their plans for the future. 6 months is still not a great amount of time to be able to do that.
Some of the proposed changes, for example, the abolition of Section 21, rely on the court system. So do we feel the court system is ready, or how is that going to work?
No, I mean, in my opinion, the court system it's still overloaded at the moment anyway. I think there's still in some areas that we're dealing with the catch up from COVID times. The massive pressures on the court systems at the moment, which in some areas means that it's months. In some cases we've been seeing 9-10 months from the point of a Section 8 expiring to the case being heard in court. So to add this into that, I think it's going to add a massive pressure, and no, ultimately I don't think we will be ready.
So what's going to happen then?
I think you're completely right. I think it will only exacerbate that problem ultimately. I think it's going to bring more change. It's going to be more work for them. It's going to back that court system up more. I think also local authorities are going to really struggle to enforce a lot of this new legislation. There's so much on them. If you look through the bill, there's so much that just the local authorities there to actually implement, whether that be the penalties, enforcement of what people are doing, monitoring. When we just think locally to this area, and this applies to a lot of areas in the country, things like additional licensing, HMO licensing, particularly in sort of my sector and the student demographic, you're looking at so much they've already got on. They're already really behind on a lot of that to then throw all of this new legislation.
So council's going to need to resource. They need to
absolutely
create departments, jobs, staff.
They're already under resourced, and we all know that. So,
and what about these councils that probably don't have the money to start creating new departments and paying staff salaries?
Well,
I mean,
because some councils are effectively bankrupt, aren't they? And some local, Birmingham, for example, is struggling massively. So
and I think that's another area where there is already a pressure, and then this is just going to be adding to that without the right amount of preparation and lead time for it.
So how do we as a business help our landlords navigate what is going to be quite a tricky time, you know, because if it's going to all go through this year, that's not long.
No, and I think for us within Sheldon Bosley Knight, it is going to be about educating them. It's going to be about getting the message out to landlords, letting them know what the changes are, what the impact will be, but then more importantly, what we can do as the agent to support them with that journey. Not all landlords will want to exit the market. I know that there is a general fear at the moment around landlords that will exit because of what is to come, but I think it's just another learning curve. It's another storm really to ride and get through. But a lot of landlords are going to need the support and backing of a good letting and managing agent, which is ultimately what we're here for. So, I am a big believer that knowledge is power. So it's about sharing that knowledge then, and preparing for what is to come to make sure that the landlords are still on board and can keep a positive mindset about those changes.
And what about, is that similar for student landlords?
Definitely educational piece is correlates with what you guys are doing, and obviously we need to keep close with our landlords about what they need to think about and the items that are coming in. But I think we need to probably do a bit more close hand holding, in the sense that it really is quite a big change to our sector. Some of the particular parts of legislation do affect our sector in a more extreme way, I think, than the general residential lettings market.
So what in particular then would you say is specific to student landlords?
So I think the fixed term and monthly payment schedule is different for student landlords, because it's quite common to have termly payments in line with student loans, international funding from parents or other institutions externally, for example. So that monthly payment structure in our sector doesn't really suit either party, I don't think, because I don't think it's what actually students or parents want either, and it's definitely not what landlords want, because they, one of the securities behind having, when you have a student tenancy, there's some trials and tribulations that go with it, and in some ways it's more simple to go down the sort of normal residential route. But when you've gone that extra mile and potentially got additional, licensing requirements fulfilled and things like that, to then also have to have a monthly payment structure with a group of people who aren't earning monthly salaries in many cases is quite hard. So there's that element. I think the obviously originally we were fearing that there was going to be no way for that actual cycle to operate as well. So a bit like you guys were talking about earlier, the lead time being short. I mean, for us, we work in the sort of annual cycle. So for us, the big headline for me really is it's next year's cycle. Without whether it's August, September, or October, it's next year's student cycle this is going to affect. So it will affect that market straight away. And they look for properties in advance, which we all know.
I'm guessing you've already got tenants signed
We've
up now.
We've got a majority of our tenants signed up for September.
Which is going to impact.
And a lot of those are on fixed terms, and a lot of those are on non-monthly payment schedules, and there's a lot of factors that will really make it a little bit more difficult for students as well, I think. So the 6 months in advance, it concerns me probably one of the most about the bill, because that means that we can't actually enter into tenancies more than 6 months in advance, meaning actually a lot of areas, including our area in the country, are going to be able to, going to have to in some way delay. And we're looking at ways we can sort of make sure we can still operate the marketing for students, but in terms of them actually securing and knowing they've got that property 100% signed up, they're going to be delayed, which is going to skew when they're looking, and it's going to be more exam season.
A common reaction to this renters' right bill, which is it doesn't help either side.
Well, I was going to say,
tenants or landlords, and I think that's what everyone's getting quite frustrated about.
Particularly on the student side, I think it's very weighted towards. I can't quite see why either party are going to.
I was going to say, because students are presumably quite stressed with thinking about their course and making sure they got their work done on time and paying their student loans or whatever. If they're then having to stress about housing as well, that's not going to help them either, surely. No,
and I think it's limiting options for them as well. The 1 and 2 bedroom element. I don't quite understand the reason behind that in terms of.
On that.
Yeah, so 1 and 2 bedrooms have been exempt from the ground 4A for eviction, which they're bringing in. So they're giving a additional eviction ground, which if you fulfil the student test, they're calling it, you can actually serve notice on those tenants in advance and make sure that you can still operate that annual new group cycle. But that only applies for 3 bedroom plus at the moment. And originally we felt that might be an oversight, and it seems that now that's going through. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, for example, now are going to either be in a strange space in that between two markets, or they will start fading out of the student market altogether, really, because you won't know if the students are leaving, and therefore you can't market for a new group.
Do you think landlords will switch potentially from student to residential?
I think there will definitely be some of that.
I think we will probably see a fair bit of that, to be honest with you, where to continue as a landlord in the market, obviously the rent per unit is substantially more than what they can get through letting that property as a whole. But I think there are or will be landlords that will be considering making that change to be able to continue in the market rather than exiting completely.
And that's going to presumably impact students in that there will be fewer properties for them to consider, and and that's going to add extra stress to parents and their children and rents.
There's, I mean, that part of the market as well, that small flat market makes up over 30% of the current students from what I've understood, and certainly for us it does as a business. So yes, it transfers to residential easier than a large HMO, so there is more possibility of changing the the kind of market you're operating in, but definitely that is going to limit the options for students.
Which will drive the rent up for the ones that are still available.
That's the only thing I think that's left in control, really, is the concern. And I know that's not the intention of the bill, apparently.
But it seems that the bill, maybe the intentions are good, but what is being proposed perhaps isn't. For example, the fixed term issue, Becca, explain a bit more about that, because I think that's exercised quite a lot of landlords, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think we're very much now, have been for several years, I think, recession of kind of 2007, 2008. Fixed terms now are longer. We used to work with minimum term of 6 months, which we still do as a minimum term, but there's a lot more request. Most of our tenancies now start off on 12 months at least. So tenants have been wanting that security, landlords have been wanting that security. So 12 months now seems to be the norm. The message and information that we have at the moment is that from the date that the bill is introduced, every tenancy will immediately become periodic. So that's whether it's been renewed, whether it's a brand new fixed term, every tenancy will immediately become periodic. So you lose that security, certainly more for the landlord. Obviously there will still be grounds on which the landlords can serve notice on the tenants and get vacant possession, but it will only be through Section 8 notice, and it will only be if they want to move back into the property themselves, or spouse, close family member. There is a list of those that would be able to live in the property. That's through using ground 1 on the Section 8, but there's going to be a new ground, which is ground 1A, that can be used under the Section 8, which would be if the landlord wants to sell the property. But it's 4 months notice, not 2. So again, it's a little bit more security for a tenant, because as well that notice can't expire before the end of a 12-month period. So whilst the tenant could move into a property today, give notice immediately, and then leave in a month, the landlord still can't serve that notice until kind of month 8 of the tenancy for that to expire then after a 12-month period. And it's only for those reasons.
That feels really prohibitive, that point, for me. I think across the board, that's one of those items that really takes that kind of ownership away, it feels, for some landlords, I think, because that covers everyone, doesn't it? I mean, that one item about wanting to sell the property and but still having to give a protected period, their circumstances could change. I think it's almost like
4 months is a long time, and if they need to sell for a financial reason, for having to.
But it's 12 months. It's 4 months notice within a minimum 12 months. Right. So if you've just let that to new tenants, and then you have like a disastrous sort of family situation or something like that, and you're a small landlord with one property. That it feels like
I think the issue there is, with a tenancy being 12 months anyway, that doesn't really change too much for a landlord. But obviously, if there was only a 6-month fixed term, because the landlord wanted to consider that they need that flexibility in case of a change, then that will be removed automatically. So it will be that from a landlord perspective, really, every tenancy will be 12 months unless the tenant serves notice. because the earliest opportunity they will be able to have a notice expiring will be at the end of that 12-month period.
But I think it's quite interesting because I think there's a sort of narrative out there that says that landlords are perhaps money grabbing, they're only doing it for profit, for their own profit. But actually, I would suggest, having spoken to you in the past, that most of our landlords are in it to provide a roof over somebody's heads and provide stability. And you came across something on LinkedIn just recently from one of our colleagues at Lovett's, where the landlord was quite clearly, sort of really proud of the fact that they were able to offer some stability to a family, to put down roots.
Yeah, I think it was a great example of the majority of landlords, and I think that's probably where this bill probably isn't quite focusing. But if I just read out the first paragraph of her testimony. So she starts saying, "I wanted to thank you personally for all you did for us and for our tenants. You made a change in their life possible. Without you agreeing to provide a service for us and to take on Christine and Merrick as tenants, the lives of this family and our own would have been very different indeed. It has meant this family had a secure and safe home, that the children could grow up, go to a nearby school, and that the family could get their life back on track. It changed their life, their futures in many ways, known and unknown. So thank you." That doesn't, to me, sound like a money landlord.
No, it doesn't.
Just for profit.
No, absolutely not. And I think that just backs up as well that we have scenarios where we're talking to landlords about rent increases, for example, and the response from some of them will be, "Oh no, but they're really good tenants. We wouldn't want to lose them as tenants. It's really important that we keep that, and that they've got the stability and that they're happy in their home. We wouldn't want to unsettle things." And so, as much as we're in a market here where supply versus demand obviously is just not stacking up, and that shortage of stock means that rents are climbing, there are still landlords there that actually increasing the rent and taking everything that they can out of it is absolutely not their number one priority.
The Lords mentioned 40% of all landlords in this country are just one property owners.
Yeah, it's like 1.7 is the average, I think, which is very small. Everyone's not a tycoon.
That's not a business, that's a pension, or that's something that they want to sort of pass down to the kids. It's and I doubt they make any.
And I think we've still got those accidental landlords as well who, didn't intentionally buy the property to enter the lettings market. They've had a change in circumstances, work relocations, moving abroad.
And some of those have struggled to continue since the tax change as well, because that was difficult for some accidental landlords, because when that came in, lots of people had personal ownership in those properties. They struggled, a few years back to maintain then. So if they've managed to sort of weather that storm, as you mentioned earlier, then this change and uncertainty could be enough to make some people
and then that's going to affect supply even more, and that could possibly push rents up even more. But certainly it could. I mean
that is what's predicted at the moment.
But are we in danger of homelessness increasing? Is that a real possibility?
And this is where the local authorities are going to be needed even more. But the pressure on them and also the lack of supply that they've got within the housing associations as well. Again, it's not stacking up, and it's additional pressure being added to different areas of the sector.
And it's also sort of a negative impact on tenants, which is presumably not what this bill is supposed to be. A bit like the no rent in advance. And Nick, explain a bit more about that.
That was a bit of a shock to us all, really, wasn't it? It wasn't really planned or wasn't known at the early stages, and just came out of the blue. That the obviously all rent is paid in advance. You pay on the first for that month, and up to this point you can pay 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 12 months up front. And the mechanism really for that isn't really. I think a lot of people think it was for a landlord to try and gain as much money as possible at once, and it's definitely not. It was a mechanism to separate the concern of financial payments. So if you're coming from another country that you don't have any history,
Yeah.
it puts them on a level peg with the other 3 or 4 applications.
Yeah.
If anyone had bad credit history or CCJ, which doesn't mean that they're bad people or have bad
could be a blip, couldn't it?
Yeah,
Blip.
it's just, it's an experience,
It
isn't it?
allowed them to also be on level playing when all applications are in, and
or at
let
least
landlords
to be considered.
be considered.
Yeah.
Now that's been taken away. I think landlords going to consciously or subconsciously be choosing the ones with
100%.
referencing, and
Massively
isolates that tenant from getting a property, and that's probably where he's, on the worst case scenario, can lead to homelessness if someone can't get a property because they can't almost equalise that financial burden, really.
And I think that is where we're going to have a challenge with international tenants. I mean, you're probably going to experience a lot of this in your market, David, but with those internationals coming into the country, they don't have the history or the background to be able to meet the referencing criteria. The landlord is ultimately appointing us as the agent to be able to find tenants that fit that criteria. They don't have a guarantor. It's got to be a UK-based guarantor. Rent in advance would normally be a way to allow those tenants to have an equal opportunity and for the landlord to consider them. Without the UK-based guarantor, there are also guarantor companies that are here that can help tenants, and that's what we've been experiencing over the recent years. But there's even now suggestion that as part of this bill that the tenant can no longer be asked to pay that guarantor company for their support, and actually that charge also needs to be passed on to the landlord. So I think that's going to shift things as well, because the landlord is ultimately going to be paying more to let the property to that particular tenant.
That makes international students almost, unattainable for landlords, because why would someone pay additionally to then still have the same payment schedule with more risk? And this isn't something that I feel the bill was intended to do, but for example, on international students, Nick's exactly right. The only differentiator there was the upfront payment, because you'd think, well, generally people studying from overseas are a bit more affluent because it's quite costly to actually do that, so therefore they're bringing money into the economy, and also because of the way they're funding it, they're able to pay up front, whether that be 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, 3 months, and it's very normal. And as you say, now if the playing field is level, it's going to make it really hard to choose those students ultimately from our sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with the lack of guarantor as well, or that being an extra cost on the landlord.
Because that was always the trade-off. If they couldn't get the guarantor, we could get the upfront payment and give some stability to a landlord. And then if they go back to the country and you've got no legal recourse, that's okay, because at least you've got the rent and you can continue that tenancy and it's fixed.
And this is where I think there's a bit of a disconnect with, I think, obviously the policy makers and actually what's going on the shop fronts. Is that was a mechanism to support tenants.
That's not
and help tenants, and they're taking it away, thinking that it was a landlord mechanism to get more money.
So do you think that was the rationale behind it then? That this narrative of landlords just wanting big profits, the money, the financial aspect.
And don't get me wrong, has there been rogue landlords who have taken advantage of this rent in advance to get lots of money up front and service the tenant poorly and not put that money back into a property for safe living? Yes, absolutely. But for that 0.1% or 0.5%, you're punishing the rest of the market, which is tenants.
And it is going to make it really, really difficult, which, as I've said, you're probably going to feel more of an impact from this, David, with the student market. But, we're already now looking at the applications. Obviously the bill isn't introduced yet, but we are looking at these applications and thinking, well, actually we need to be having this conversation with the landlord now, because they need to be aware that by moving this tenant in and accepting maybe 6 months rent in advance now, they're not going to be able to do that again in 6 months' time. And if that tenancy is going to continue, there is a risk. There is a risk there.
And for us, we're writing agreements for next sort of academic cycle now, which, as you say, those changes are going to come in during the period. That's really challenging.
And is that going to have an impact on overseas student numbers then? I mean, is that likely? Because that's got to be a concern for the universities, for whom, a proportion of overseas students really helps them in terms of their own finances.
I think what's interesting is that the exemption for the purpose-built student accommodation, I think that's really interesting, because you talk about, landlords being money grabbing and things like that. the landlords and the owners of those types of buildings are significantly larger corporate structures that make significantly more money than the average 1.2 property owned landlord, and yet they're being exempt from the bill, meaning they can come out of the assured tenancy system. That for me doesn't seem to make too much sense if the intention of the bill was to actually stop these money grabbing landlords taking money from local tenants, because it feels much more like those tenancies are going to push over to the purpose-built sector, particularly international students who already do favour that, in fairness, from some areas overseas, but it almost gives them no other option, because they won't be considered in the private student accommodation sector, whereas the purpose-built will be nicely ready for them over there with fixed terms, upfront payments and whatever else. So that does feel a little bit more contradictory.
Do you know why they've been given special treatment, if you like?
I think there's been a push towards that sort of institutional type accommodation for a while. I mean, even when Right to Rent came in and the on-campus accommodation was exempt from that, and I believe the purpose-built might have a bit of a different. I'm not 100% expert on that, but there's definitely an exemption for Right to Rent, for example, on at university accommodation. And what we always thought at the time was, well, we're only going to have students from those places, and we're going to verify that they're, through identification, that they're at that university. So we never quite understood that, and I think there is definitely a push towards getting student accommodation sort of institutionalised in a way and making it a bit more. It's ring fenced over there. There's also a lot of investment in that type of building and accommodation from overseas and in the UK. And I think it does seem like things have always been pushing in that direction in the last 10 years, and this feels like a real way to accelerate that.
But go back to your point about students. I mean, again, concentrate on the student part. They just want to concentrate on getting their degree and they're going to now be burdened with having to try and keep up with monthly payments, and most of these students is the first time leaving home. They get their student loan in. They're going to have to money manage. I mean, these are all good sort of life lessons, but I think
the loans aren't changing to be monthly.
No.
So that I'm aware of at the moment. So because it's not part of this bill. So that will mean that it will literally be, I've got to make that last. And that doesn't feel like it's going to be beneficial to them.
But that also creates nervousness again for the landlord, though, doesn't it? Because they will be aware of that situation.
And at a time when students, like you say, it's the first time they've been away from home, probably, the first time they've had to budget, probably, finding their feet, making new friends in a place that they probably don't know very well. That's quite a stressful situation for them.
And that's just domestic students, basically. That's without even thinking about international, where they've got to think about, in a new
the language
country
as well.
And parents who fund a lot of that might want to actually think, well, I know they're stable for a fixed period.
Absolutely.
I've paid the rent, or I know I'm going to pay the rent on those those kind of intervals.
Again, it's to help the tenants. And it's been the rug's been pulled out from under them.
No, and then I think that it's also considering as well the growth and development of the private rental sector in the future, because going back to kind of pre-February 1997, when it was tenancies on that were assured tenancies only, so before assured short hold, so before a landlord could serve notice and take the property back. It's almost like we're just reversing and we're going back to pre-1997 really, when it was just assured tenancies. But at those times there weren't the lenders that were prepared to give mortgages to buy-to-let landlords. So I think this is also going to impact on the growth of the private rental sector. So not only have we got to focus on trying to retain landlords and hope that they don't exit the market, there's also thoughts about then other buy-to-let investors coming through, because I think it's going to be more and more challenging when they can't serve those notices, they can't take the property back. There is a bigger risk there, which potentially means then there's going to be less support and products available to support landlords who want to come into the market.
That will surely affect funding. It must do, because the lenders won't have as much security as they currently do, because again. They won't be able to absolutely bank on. They ask for agreements, don't they? Lenders ask for agreements as proof. They'll all just be periodic. So they'll have to just, I presume, hope it's going to be a 12-month consistent period, and there'll be nothing much else they can do about it, which is going to be interesting to see how the banks respond to that.
Silver lining and trying to get
Yes,
some positivity.
yes.
I know we've probably spent 29 minutes on quite negative market. On a positive though, if the tenant is happy in a good house that's well maintained and well serviced from a good landlord, nothing that we've discussed now will actually cause any issues.
No.
You know, nothing much will change on a landlord's point if that they are a professional landlord with the support of an agent. That's really important. So any further changes are communicated to the landlord and educated by the agent. Yeah. And the tenants are good, then 12 months, 24 months, 5 years. It
could be good in some instances on the non-student market. I agree. Yeah, I don't think for we handle non-student as well, and I don't feel like it's as much of an impact on that side. And it can work, and in some ways it's similar.
Yeah, because we've had discussions where you have suggested that the private rental sector is still a good investment for people who want to be part of it. So there's still
and even when we look at our own portfolio within the business across the regions that we cover, I mean, I go as far as saying probably 50% of them are periodic tenancies anyway, that have got long-standing tenants that have just had that rollover consistently for a number of years. Yeah. So I don't think the periodic or the fact that there isn't a fixed-term renewal there, a fixed-term tenancy, is a massive concern. It's just that initial period, potential change in the landlord's circumstances, the fact that it would be 4 months' notice and there's only those two reasons that the landlord can take the property back. Yeah. But I think, again, it comes back to just making sure the landlords have the knowledge, that they're educated, and that they know the protection that's available as well. We're now, as you know, offering the rent guarantee and legal expenses cover, which I think is going to be more important than ever before.
Yeah, I was going to say that's going to be really important.
Absolutely, not just for the rent guarantee side of things, so that the landlord has the cover if the tenant doesn't pay, but the legal expenses side of things. If things are going to take longer to get through to the court, there's obviously the 4 month notice period. So having that cover in place is going to protect landlords even more and be more important than ever before, in my opinion.
And I think it's really important for tenants as well, because they're probably thinking, oh my goodness, it sounds like maybe landlords could quit the market. There's already a shortfall in the stock, so they probably be equally concerned. So the fact that you're saying that there is still positives, I mean many positives to being a landlord, that will give some comfort to tenants to think, well, it reassures me that it's a positive, it could be a positive future.
And I think it's turning more and more professional, which as an industry, which I think we've always wanted to it to go down, and the landlords who stay, I think, will flourish. I think if it's done correctly, like I said, with the right support of an agent, I think being a landlord and having property and ownership is still a really good investment, and will thrive.
It's an important point as well with a landlord that uses an agent, because there are over 700 pieces of legislation that need to be covered. The tenancy agreement and tenancy deposit scheme regulations. All of these things that have to be covered, your EPC, your gas safety, your EICR, the safety side of things as well, that a lot of landlords don't really think about when they're first entering the market, or they're thinking, well, I've got this property, my circumstances are changing, I need to consider letting it out. So again, it's about educating the landlord, but those landlords that want to be educated and want to do things properly will be instructed in a good way.
We went to the conference,
the National Residential Landlord
Association, and I thought it was a fantastic
brilliant
conference.
Wasn't it? Very good.
Oh, and sorry, I forgot, Becky, we all went.
I did. I was there.
You were there, sorry. The three of us went. And I thought what was brilliant was we walked out, and the biggest message was adapt. Yeah. And I think that's in any market.
And that, for us, I think that's really apparent, because with us, very much the sentiment that you guys, I definitely share that with you, in the sense that they've got to professionalise what they're doing. They need a specialist in our sector like us for students, because there's even more legislation and nuance to that, and more things to consider. But I think for me, there's an extra thought process around the student side, which is looking at when they're doing new investments as well, future proofing and transferability to different markets and things like that as well, just to keep themselves in a flexible position, as you say, adaptable for the
Yeah.
future.
I mean, if you think about all the industries, everyone's adapting right now.
Yeah.
We're going through AI, whether it's anything else. There is a huge adaptation to the changes, and landlords are just involved in it. And I think it's not an unknown territory. We adapt every cycle.
Landlords are quite a resilient group of people generally, and have
absolutely.
ridden the storm quite a few times.
That came out at the conference last year, didn't it? I mean, it was just really apparent that yes, there are choppy waters ahead, but with the right agent, with the right support, landlords can feel positive about things and continue to thrive, which is and also tenants assured that they've got somewhere to live, which is equally important.
And I do think it does make having an agent a bit more important. I think it'd be a little bit more of a scary time to go through alone without that support. So I definitely think having the right agent there is a real benefit at the moment. Agents definitely going to be earning their money, let's just say, for the future.
I think that in that conference that the landlords that we were sitting amongst, the ones who were looking the most nervous and the most petrified, when one of the presenters asked, how many landlords use agents, the ones that didn't put their hands up, so they were doing it on their own, were the ones sitting there.
It's quite a landlord-focused group, isn't it, as well?
And I think that's why, because it's a minefield, and you just need some professional.
It really. And I think we've been through the times where there's a lot of focus around fee and competition on what that fee is. But I do see that things are going to change in that the advice and guidance from agents to landlords and the support that the landlords will want to lean on us for. It's going to be even more crucial. So doing things right, being prepared, educating landlords, making sure you're offering services where they've got that protection for all eventualities, I think is going to be more important than ever, and landlords will realise that.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming in to
have
a chat. It's brilliant, and I'm sure we'll be back in the studio again to talk some more. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.